name is Marc Barr. I was born and spent the first 20-odd years of my life in New York. I was born in the Bronx, New York, but I went to school in a community college in New York City, and then SUNY Oswego. And then I went to Memphis State for graduate school, which brought me to living in Tennessee for about 40 years, close to 40 years. Graduate school, then I stayed, and I eventually started teaching in a couple of different schools in that state. The schooling was ceramics. The teaching was a very little bit of ceramics, but mostly foundations at the beginning, art, when I was in an art school, like I understand you are. And then when I started at public university called Middle Tennessee State, I was in the art department, but not for ceramics. It was related to computers and desktop publishing and graphic design. They bought a bunch of computers, didn't know what to do with it. None of the faculty wanted to mess around with it. I said, fine, whatever. If it'll keep me working here, which is what I wanted to do. I was aging out of the bar business, restaurant business. So it was interesting. And that's how I got involved actually to SIGGRAPH, because I went to a training program that Apple sponsored, and I met a woman named Jackie Morey. She told me about this organization and conference called SIGGRAPH, and I said, it's very interesting, and I'll check it out, and I did. And then whilst I was in school, and after school and teaching and all that, I stayed involved in SIGGRAPH from 1990, really, 1990 on, in various different capacities. So I met Jackie Morey. Mm-hmm. I go to the conference in 90 in Dallas. I meet various people. I attend various sessions. I go, this is really interesting. I would like to, get more involved. And then in 1992, the education committee at the time under Scott Owen, they had these grants for educators, little competitive program that would essentially pay for you to go to the conference for a week and give you literally a box load of stuff, books, all printed material. And actually, I won one of those. And then a few months afterwards, Jackie calls me up on the phone and says, look, I've been taking care of the booth for the education committee at the conference. I don't want to do it any longer. Would you like to do this? And I said, sure, whatever. And I did that for a few years. And then eventually that makes you part of the education committee. In the 90s, being a director for education was an EC position. You go through elections and all that stuff. And then I served a term, and then I served a couple of other terms after it was no longer an EC position, but still, the EC selects you. You're no longer voting. And then I moved into getting involved in conferences. Starting in 2000, I was on the conference committee for 2000, doing something called SIGKids. It was an opportunity to take essentially an empty space in the Children's Museum, and through donations from the newspaper, the Times-Picayune, and also from Microsoft, I was able to set up a little lab. I was able to get a number of different kind of classes started during the week that would expose local area children and children of attendees, right? They were grade school kids. They didn't have these resources in this, this was before Katrina and anybody paid any attention. And, it's not a great neighborhood or whatever. And these are public school kids. There are certain kids that don't go to public school and certain kids that do go to public school. And there's a vast, oftentimes, discrepancy between resources in the public schools and the private school. What was also cool about the thing with the museum was everything I got stayed afterwards. That was really good. And I got a bunch of student volunteers involved, and I got not faculty, but staff from the museum involved, and actually was part of a learning experience for them too. The thing that actually was the biggest hit was the stop motion stuff. Real simple claymation, kind of thing. The kids loved that. And then we also had a number of interactive exhibits downstairs, sort of like a junior emerging technologies for educators. When you're introducing something to people that didn't have anything at all, everything was great to them. So it worked out really well. And I was able to do that again in 2002 when we were in San Antonio. And then I was on 2002, 2006, and all that time also still being involved in the education committee. And then I applied, I guess it was for 2014. I wasn't selected, and that's fine. And then I was asked for 2015. I come from essentially the non-technical side of things. Again, my background is traditional studio art, ceramics, a little bit of printmaking, stuff like that. One thing that always got me about SIGGRAPH was the intersection of all this different stuff. I thought that SIGGRAPH was a really good example of where these things can all come together. And I wanted to really support that if it was my turn. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I thought were important. We started this concept that we still use called the Experience Hall, which is the intersection of the e-tech and the studio and the art gallery and all these other experiential events. And sometimes you don't know where one ends and the other begins. Again, I kind of like that. I also wanted to highlight the making world, for lack of a better way of putting it, because I met a lot of people through SIGGRAPH that started out, let's say you're a CGI person now, but you started out doing practical effects. Actually, you like to build models and stuff like that, and masks or whatever. And I thought that was a good way of highlighting that. And I thought, okay, here's a good way of highlighting these things. Another area was I've always been intrigued by how various technologies are used, integrated in traditional studio art practices. I mean, that's how I kind of got involved with it myself, was for printmaking, doing color separations. I started talking to people that were involved in rapid prototyping, CNC mills, all kinds of stuff like that I really didn't know much about, but I knew it was interesting. And I wanted the art gallery for that year to go in that direction. So we highlighted handmade items, which was a little bit different than what we usually have in the art gallery, right? I mean, one of the things that I was intrigued by, because I was teaching animation classes, 3D animation classes. We could take these models, go across the campus over to industrial studies, and they had a way of, outputting these models as real things tangible devices. Here's some of the more practical things you can do with it.
Your theme was X Roads of Discovery, or
Crossroads of Discovery.
Yeah.
And we tried to physically do that, because I remember, on the floor, right, that's where the skull was, because that was another thing that I was really intrigued by, was 3D mapping, projection mapping, right? And then also we had an opportunity to do some domes in that same place. And that's where I thought all this different stuff could come together. And we actually had an X painted on the floor, I think. The skull was, again, it was something that I got connected to the fellow who was behind it through Roy Anthony, called the guy up, talked about it. Sure, we can bring it. Okay, great. And then I worked with a contracting company that SIGGRAPH works with, and they went down and picked it up from this guy's house. Same thing with the quilts. I don't know if you noticed the quilts that we had around the floor. A lot of people didn't notice them, but again, another thing, they were handmade quilts by a fellow whose background was in engineering. Again, another person quite familiar with the SIGGRAPH conference, but from a different point of view. You got to pick a theme. I mean, you don't have to, but I want to, something that tried to connect these various, at times, disparate elements together. Going back, for what always worked for me about the conference and the organization was the mix. You never knew who you were standing next to, looking at a piece on the wall or riding on the bus at some event or something like that. Matter of fact, I'll give you a good example. The first year when I went in 1990, right, I had just started using a program called Deluxe Paint on the Amigas we had. So I'm on the bus going to some event, and we all had our name tags, right? And sitting next to me is that fellow Dan Silver, who wrote that piece of software. Same thing with the keynote. So, you always banter about, everybody on the committee has input on this. One of the things that I always liked in the world of academia, as maybe a role model for a good program, was the Media Lab at MIT. And I remember back in the early 80s watching this TV program called Smithsonian World. And it had a profile of what they were doing at this school. And I said, this is a wild place. This is really cool. So I was thinking, I had no idea who ran the program at the time. I said, well, maybe we can get somebody from the Media Lab to come into the keynote. So I emailed this fellow, Joichi Ito, who at the time was the director of the program. It's a great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Joy Ito. Over the past 30 years, Joy has been recognized around the world for his work as an activist, an entrepreneur, and for his advocacy of emergent democracy, privacy, and internet freedom. During this time, he has made Time Magazine's list of cyber elite and has been named one of the 25 most influential people on the web by Business Week, among other recognitions. He's also served as both board chair and CEO of Creative Commons, currently sits on the boards of the New York Times Company, the Knight Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and Sony Corporation. As director of the MIT Media Lab, Joy explores how radical new approaches to science and technology can transform society in substantial and positive ways.
We have a very diverse set of faculty. We try to always hire faculty that are somewhat orthogonal to things that we do, that somehow relate to things that we do. Because we're a relatively small lab, we have in 24 faculty, about 150 grad students, we try to only do things that no one else would do. And so we recently did a faculty search, and we've used this word before, but one of the requirements for this search was that they had to be anti-disciplinary. It's different from interdisciplinary, because interdisciplinary is when you have sort of the chemistry guys and the computer graphics guys talking to each other. Anti-disciplinary is that space that's between or beyond the disciplines, stuff that just doesn't fit in anywhere else. We tend to fund assistant professors, and by the time they get up to tenure, they've sort of developed a whole new field. At some level, this is what SIGGRAPH is about as well. All of these were either in the same person or at least in the same room, like photography, like computer graphics, where you had the artists talking to the engineers. And I think that SIGGRAPH has always been, to me, the place where the artists and the engineers and the designers and the scientists all come together and often are in the same person. And I think a lot of the award winners would be those types of people.
I had never dealt with a person on that level before or anything like that. So it worked out great. He was really thrilled to do it. I thought he did a great talk. They brought a bunch of stuff down that they were, working on and all. They did a bit of a reception, which, again, you want to do things at the conference for the attendees to make them feel like they're having a good time. I mean, that's a part of our mission, right? We're there to educate you. Sure. We're there to, open your eyes to new things. Sure. But all of that is better if everybody's having a fun time. And you have to realize that's an important part. The socializing, we do all the surveys afterwards. What do you value about coming to the conference and so on and so on. And one of the ones that's always way up there is the networking. And it doesn't take much for that to happen. Meaning just providing places in the convention center where groups of people can informally get together for a few minutes. It's easy to do. It doesn't need to be a food and liquor fueled event. That's always more fun. An important part of being the conference chair is you're responsible, you're a steward for a product that's been around for a while. It has a reputation. You don't want to screw it up. And you have to realize that it's not your conference. You were given this opportunity for the course of it's like a 3-year commitment to shepherd this thing. If you're a paranoid person like myself, you don't want to screw it up. And you want to surround yourself with the best people you can. And also a really, really important part of it for SIGGRAPH is the professional contractors we work with. I mean, that's one of the things that the average attendee knows nothing about. They don't know and they don't care, and they shouldn't have to care about how the whole thing comes together. But when you're involved on the other side of it, you're realizing, wow, it's a really well-oiled machine, has great people, and you want them to keep coming back. Both the people that are your members, your attendees, the people that work on conference committees, subcommittees, all that stuff. Remember, most everybody's a volunteer. They're doing it because they want to. And you want to make them feel valued, and their input is valued. And it is. And that's part of what makes the job of the person that's chair not easier, but better, because you know that this area is in the hands of a person that really knows what they're doing. Here's an impact of doing something. Here's the financial impact of doing something. Here's the history. That's a really important part of it, too. A couple of things that worked out really well from that I really enjoyed. One aspect, academic, like yourself. I was able to have on my committee a person that had been an undergrad student with me, who then had since gone on to graduate school, professional career, and actually became a conference chair.
Oh, wow.
Mickey, for 2019. So that was great. The majority of students you have aren't going to be the folks you're going to remember. I don't know how long you've been doing it, but there's some kids that 20 years later, 30 years, wow, you really value those that worked out well.